in Tasmania, there's a cave that doesn't exist anymore. It had no gate, no warning signs, just a tight crack in the hillside near Mount Faulkner, Australia. If you weren't looking for it, you just walk right past it. But locals knew. They called it Devil's Den. And after what happened there in 1968, they didn't just close it, they blew it up. The entrance was sealed forever with controlled explosives. Before we get into what happened, you need to understand who actually went in. These weren't reckless thrill seekers. They were smart, clever, some of them from rich families, and they were treated like they were untouchable. And for most of their lives, that seemed true. They climbed through storm drains, explored old rail tunnels that no one ever dared to enter, and every time, they walked away with nothing but scrapes and stories. And that was all until they found Devil's Den. Tim Walter was the ringleader. Not the loudest, not the toughest guy, but everyone followed him. December 14th, 1968, the 6 friends rode out to Mount Faulkner with nothing but candles and a box of matches. No helmets, no ropes, no plan. They didn't even bring food. They found the crack in the hillside, lit their candles, and dropped into the dark. Devil's Den wasn't a tourist cave. It was a collapsed dolerite rift, sharp, fractured stone. Dolerite doesn't erode cleanly like limestone. It breaks, shifts, and stacks itself into unstable layers. It was tight, airless, and the kind of space that makes your chest tighten just looking at it. And still, they kept going. Until it happened. Somewhere deep inside, a section of the ceiling gave out. Dozens of rocks fell, big ones, small ones, and sharp ones. The friends were hit from every side. Their candles went out and the tunnel went black. They weren't screaming or shouting names. One of the friends, Peter Fisher, had blood running down his face from a gash above his eye. 2 of them, Doug Hall and Bill Fell, realized that they were closest to the entrance. They didn't wait. They tunneled and crawled as fast as they could, scraping up their entire body. And when they made it out to daylight, they didn't stop. They ran 2 miles through the forest to find help. When the police arrived, it was dusk. Rescuers descended into the cave and began pulling the friends out one by one. Fisher was still bleeding, and the other ones were still rattled, but alive. But not all of them. One name kept being shouted, but no one answered. It was Tim. When they reached him, they realized why. He was unconscious, not dead. He was just pinned. A massive slab of rock had landed across his legs, and worse, it had done so in the one part of the tunnel that no one wanted to see blocked. A narrow vertical shaft about 10 inches wide. Not even enough space to turn your head. And the rock pinning Tim, well, it wasn't just a boulder. It was the one thing that was holding the rest of that cave section together. By nightfall, the entrance to Devil's Cave had turned into a rescue camp. Police, cavers, miners, locals, even the army showed up. Ropes were strung through the trees, radios crackled, and floodlights hit the hillside. People passed stretchers, medical kits, and thermoses of tea through the growing crowd. Everyone wanted to help, but no one knew how to reach Tim. Because Tim wasn't just trapped, he was wedged beneath a keystone, which is a load-bearing slab of dolerite that anchored the tunnel above him, and if it shifted the wrong way, it wouldn't just crush him, it would crush everyone inside the chamber with him that was left. The passage down to Tim was a nightmare. Because of the collapse, everything was jagged, hot, and so narrow that rescuers had to exhale just to slide forward. A few feet from Tim, the ceiling dropped just enough room to reach in, but not enough room to work. Still, they tried. Local cavers from Southern Caving Society took turns crawling in and out, bringing updates to the surface. Miners tried digging. Rescuers hauled in pry bars and chisels, but nothing worked. The rock wasn't just stuck, it was locked into place by the weight of the mountain. And at this point, Tim had been down there for 24 hours. His legs were pinned at the thigh, one worse than the other. He couldn't feel his foot anymore. His voice was quieter now, slower. A doctor from Royal Hobart Hospital crawled in, took one look, and radioed back. "We will have to amputate the leg." It wasn't a dramatic statement, it was just a cold fact. If they couldn't move the rock, and they couldn't, then they would have to cut him free. They passed a pain-relieving syringe down the line. The cave was too tight for the doctor to reach Tim himself, so a rescuer near the squeeze tried to deliver it blindly. He just kind of stuck out into the dark and jabbed Tim somewhere on the side. Not enough to knock him out, just enough to take the edge off. They needed him to be as conscious as possible, but he was in extreme pain. And even through this intense ordeal, Tim appeared to stay calm. He told one rescuer that he didn't care about the dark. And it wasn't the moving of the cave that got to him. It wasn't the waiting, it was the pressure. Tim didn't realize it at first, but his body was going into shock. The worst danger wasn't the rock or the cave. It was what the rock was doing to his body. When a limb is pinned for too long, the blood flow stops, muscles die, the tissue begins to rot. When you finally free the leg and the blood surges back into the body, it can dump toxins into the bloodstream, enough to cause kidney failure, heart failure, or sudden cardiac arrest. It's called crush syndrome. It kills people all the time. But long before that happens, the body starts to break down. Shock is the first sign. Blood gets redirected away from the skin, the stomach, and even the limbs. Then sent straight to the brain and heart. It's a survival mechanism, but it doesn't last forever. Tim was pale, his skin was cold, he was barely speaking, his breath was shallow, and the rescuers around him knew what was happening. They didn't say it out loud, but the fear was written on their faces. If the legs stayed pinned much longer, the damage might become irreversible. But if they moved the rock too suddenly and the blood rushed back into dead tissue, it could poison his organs in minutes. They were watching a countdown they couldn't see, working against a clock they couldn't hear. One wrong move could end everything. The doctor knew it, and so did the rescuers, but they didn't tell Tim. Through the pain, the cold, and the dark, Tim stayed in a false sense of calm. But his body was slipping, and time was almost up. But above ground, the conversation was shifting. No one said it directly, but they were already thinking through what an amputation would look like. How to do it in a tunnel, how much leg to save, and whether it would work at all. The mood changed. Everything was quieter now, a little slower. Everyone understood the magnitude of the situation and that this might not be a rescue anymore. Still, no one left. They rotated shifts. They crawled back in. They checked on Tim, but things weren't getting better. By Sunday morning, the rescue was falling apart. The cave had shifted again overnight. More dust, more cracks. One rescuer came out shaking. He said he heard the rock groan. Kind of like when you're on a frozen lake and you hear the ice start to crack. It's very rattling when you have nowhere to go and know that if something does crack or shift in the wrong way, you're dead. Another said that he saw a ceiling slab slowly moving downward. No one wanted to say it out loud, but everyone was thinking the same thing. This cave is going to collapse with Tim in it. Tim was still conscious though, but not by much. His foot was ice cold. His voice barely carried. He'd been underground for nearly 30 hours, and the Keystone Rock had begun to settle deeper. The Tasmanian police sent out a desperate call to Victoria. They needed people who could work in a place that was about to collapse. People who wouldn't panic when the air got thin and the walls started shaking. Not just rescuers, cavers, mechanics, medics, and problem solvers. 6 men came. 2 were from St. John's Ambulance, Section Officer Alan Smith and Sergeant Eddie Briner. The others were part of the Victorian Speleological Association, Graham Wilson, John Driscoll, and Peter Matthews, in Mall Downs. They arrived with their own gear, against orders. Not just ropes and radios, but something no one else had even thought about, a porto power. It's a hydraulic rescue tool usually reserved for car crashes, the kind of thing you use to pop a door off in a wreck. By late afternoon, they were on site. Wilson and Smith came in by helicopter, the others by road under the lights and sirens. They didn't stop to be briefed, they just dropped their bags and went straight into the cave. Because the entrance to Devil's Den is so small, one of the rescuers had to strip down under his boiler suit. The tunnel dropped fast. It sloped, then tightened again. Crawling turned into wriggling. Then it turned into something worse. Ahead was a small staging chamber, barely large enough to sit. Then a final squeeze, 10 inches high, a tunnel that vanished beneath the rock ceiling held up by nothing but friction and chance. The Victoria team stared at the slab in silence. Still, Eddie wanted to try. He crawled in and spoke to Tim, calm, soft, and direct. He wasn't trying to hide anything. Tim knew things were very serious. Eddie said that they were going to try something new, something risky. He then backed out and started setting up the tool. The porto power was wedged carefully under the edge of the slab, just enough space to slot in the tip and ratchet the handle. Eddie started to pump. The tool made a lot of noise, and some dust fell. The slab made a sound. Then everything shifted again. A deep rumble echoed through the cave. Already wedged headfirst in the squeeze, he thought his head was going to be squished. Then he slowly started pulling himself back out, getting scraped on both sides of his head. The tunnel was so tight that he had to twist and contort and yank his head out. Then he popped back into the chamber. He was soaked in sweat and wide-eyed. The porto power had failed, or maybe it just paused. Either way, the rock pinning Tim had it moved. Or rather, it moved the wrong way. Deeper, more pressure, and Tim's leg had gone numb. The team knew what that meant. The clock wasn't just ticking, he was about to die. Crush syndrome, circulatory shock. If they got him out too late, it wouldn't matter. They unpacked steel screw stemples, adjustable rods you twist between floor and ceiling to act like supports. One by one, they were installed around the keystone. The space was now like a cage, a metal skeleton meant to hold up the mountain, or at least buy them a little time. Eddie repositioned the porto power. This time, it had to work. Eddie gave the signal. If the rock moved, it might collapse the tunnel, but at least they had a fighting chance. Eddie crawled forward, dragging the porto power under his chest. Behind him, the other men waited in silence, holding their breath in the dark. Tim hadn't said much in the last hour. Just one soft grunt when somebody accidentally nudged his foot. His face was coated in dirt and sweat, his lips dry and cracked. Eddie placed the hydraulic spreader back under the edge of the keystone. He turned the pump handle. Once, twice, a groan from the slab. Dust fluttered from above. A third pump. The tool hissed. Stressed steel against stone. Then, movement. The rock shifted half an inch, then another. It didn't fall, and Tim's leg moved with it. There was no cheer, just a stillness. One man whispered, "It's loose." Another passed the message back. They got Tim's leg out. It was still attached, still bleeding, but out. This was good progress and exactly what they wanted, but Tim was still far from getting out of this alive, not to mention all the rescuers. Eddie slithered backward, careful not to brush the slab with his shoulder. Another man passed the stretcher forward. But there was a problem. It wouldn't fit. The chamber was too narrow, even flexed flat. It caught on the walls. They had measured it wrong. There was no time to argue. They stripped canvas from the pack frames and wrapped Tim like a package. His legs bound with webbing, his chest secured, his arms at his sides. No room for comfort, just containment. Then came the crawl. They were all very aware that the cave could still collapse, and getting Tim through with this awkward shape was probably going to make it collapse. Two men led the way, clearing space and bracing rock. The two men behind pushed. Tim was dragged like cargo, sliding belly up over jagged stone, his face bouncing softly with every shift. The first vertical squeeze was only 10 inches high. They tilted him sideways. Someone whispered, "Watch his knee and face." Another said, "We have to go. We don't care. We're losing time." Every movement they made, they heard soft cracks, gritty grinding. Not voices, not tools, just the rock itself shifting with them. Tim's eyes fluttered open again. He started to feel the pain, and then he screamed. After that, he went silent and was unresponsive. Rescuers knew the signs. Consciousness fading, blood pressure collapsing, the risk of crush syndrome, dead tissue flooding his bloodstream now that the circulation had returned. A lethal mix of potassium, acid, and cellular waste. If it reached his heart, it could stop it instantly. One rescuer passed the message forward that he's non-responsive, then the radio cut out. Above ground, the silence was deafening. People didn't know what was going on. Some were starting to say that Tim had died. 2 officers leaned in over the receiver, tapping it, trying to make contact. Nothing. They weren't sure if everyone in the cave was dead or not. Then, someone whispered, "He's gone." A paramedic nearby stood up and grabbed a folded body bag. People backed away. Tim's mom staggered forward, her eyes searching the hillside. Her husband grabbed her hand and held tight. Minutes passed. Below, the rescue continued, or what was left of it. They tried to move faster, less careful, less methodical. The crawl was collapsing. Time was running out. Tim's body was completely limp. A hand on his chest felt no breath, but he did have a pulse. And at this point, to the rescuers, the tunnel felt endless. One by one, the rescuers squeezed through a final S-bend. The canvas caught on a sharp edge. Someone sliced it free with a knife, and Tim's leg dangled out behind them, limp. At the main shaft, they stopped. This would be the last haul. One rescuer scrambled up the rope, another hooked it up to Tim's bindings. Tim's canvas was unwrapped at this point and shredded from the rock walls. His body scraped the stone, twisting slowly. Above, the first rescuer managed to make it out and collapsed on the grass, vomiting from stress. Then another climbed out. And then, they pushed out Tim. At first, it looked wrong. The canvas that shaped the stillness, it just looked like a body bag. Someone cried out. Tim's mom started crying. Then, movement. A twitch, a cough, a grunt. The bundle shifted. He was alive. The paramedic rushed forward, unwrapping the canvas and pulling Tim out, checking his eyes. His pupils were brown, his skin was cold. Then, his chest stopped moving. The medic didn't hesitate. CPR, 2 compressions, 3 mouth to mouth, nothing. Again, harder, a weak pulse. Then a gasp, a sudden gurgling breath. Tim then coughed up blood and a mouthful of cave dust. He blinked and looked up. He was back, but the crowd didn't cheer. They didn't move. They just stood there and watched, silent, stunned, as if afraid that he might still fall apart. Eventually, Tim was stabilized and carried to the ambulance. The headlights flicked on and the engine roared. They brought him to the hospital. He was alive for now, but no one knew for how long. Eddie crawled out last. He was caked in mud, his arms were shaking and his face pale. He didn't know if Tim was dead or alive, and people didn't know what to tell him. A man just walked up to him and shook his head and said thank you. Then Eddie just stared at the hole in the hillside, not just for Tim, but for all of them. He knew that they all could have died. Tim Walter ended up spending a few days in the hospital. He was bandaged up, and then he eventually made a full recovery. He didn't give interviews, he just went home. The men who saved him flew back to Victoria on a commercial flight. No medals, no parades, just bruises, sore hands, and silence. And Devil's Den? Well, it was gone within a few days. The Tasmania Mines Department brought in the explosives and blew it up, just a blast strong enough to seal the entrance forever. There was no ceremony and no monument, no lasting record of what happened. But the people who were there still remember, because if they hadn't gotten Tim out when they did, that cave wouldn't have taken one life. It would have taken them all. If this story hit you like it did me, drop a like and subscribe. It helps out a lot. And I've got more coming your way soon. See you next time.